Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exited in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic as always. This week we had a listener send us a few questions about really radios and some other things, but it all has to do with the fact that she's about to start her IFR training. Her name is Vicky, and she asked us to talk about things like approach control, when am I talking to departure, what's clearance delivery really mean? Again, some more radio stuff, but we thought we'd take this opportunity and kind of put a number of things wrapped around IFR training. And that day that you pass that private check ride, most people tell you, Wally, at that check ride day, they're going to start instrument training tomorrow. What is your normal response to that comment?
My normal response is go out and have some fun first. Go out and fly. Get just walk away from the training environment and just go get in an airplane and fly for a little while. We want to get better as pilots. We want to hone our skills. But I think most of us are flying because we like airplanes. So have some fun with it first and just try to fly different missions. Go somewhere for a burger. Go take someone somewhere and hop in a cab or an Uber and go shopping or something. Just fly some missions first would be my suggestion.
Yeah, and keep building that cross-country time because that's going to be important. But So don't do that shorter than 50 miles or somewhere that would make it more fun and exciting for sure. And then make sure you're maybe logging some of that stuff that you need towards your instrument rating. And I think that brings up the first big question. If I'm a private certified pilot now, next thing I want to do is start working on my instrument rating. I think one decision that pilots need to make that I had no idea about probably when I was at that stage was, should I do my IFR training, Part 141 or Part 61? If you're part of a collegiate type group, you're probably going to do a 141. I think other big schools might encourage 141. I'm a big fan of 141 training for instrument because there's one of the regs that you don't have to keep up with in 141 is the 50 miles of cross country. 50 hours of cross-country time for that instrument rating to be eligible to go meet Wally for that check ride. Right. If you do 141, you need to do 35 hours of ground, 35 hours of flight time, but that doesn't require that 50 hours of cross-country to get a graduation certificate, which is really what you need in a 141 program to be able to go see Wally for that check ride.
Right.
And that's a lot of money. You figure plane rentals and anywhere from $110 to $150 an hour times 50. That's a lot of money, even if you were to split some of that time with friends.
Yeah, and the requirement is for Part 61 for an instrument rating, 50 hours of PIC cross-country time. So a typical private pilot, you got to have a minimum of 5. Most people have a little bit more than that. So let's say you have 10. You still got 40 hours to go.
Yeah, it's a lot of flying that you have to do just to be eligible, even if you had all the other requirements covered to be eligible for that check ride.
Right.
Lots of work to do there. So seek someone out. We did a show probably a year ago now on the advantages and pros and cons of Part 141 and Part 61 for all those ratings. Go back and listen to that show if you have more questions. But I would say if you can find a school that does Part 141 training, you're probably going to benefit, unless you've done a whole lot of flying and this is secondary and later in your flying career. Maybe you already have that 50 hours and it won't benefit you as much.
Right.
Another thing that comes up a lot as people like Vicky and others ask us questions about instrument training and thinking about doing instrument training, it comes down to avionics. And I think there's people that are biased for a number of different reasons on a number of different things, but I hear a lot, man, I only want to fly in a G1000 or glass cockpit. I need all that TAA time. And of course, an autopilot helps tremendously, but that doesn't make it TAA. It's the glass cockpit. So you probably see it more than I do, but I hear conversations. I only want to fly a G1000 aircraft. That's going to be hard to do unless you're extremely lucky and have a school that has nothing but G1000 aircraft.
Yeah. I come from a background of learning to fly a long time ago before a G1000 was even thought of. And the thing about getting an instrument rating, the instrument rating that you get on your certificate will say instrument airplane. It doesn't say instrument airplane limited to G1000 only. So as an examiner, we have a challenge of maybe doing a check ride in a G1000 airplane, but the second we issue that certificate, you're legal to go out and fly in a steam gauge airplane tomorrow. I don't know where the FAA stands with if they're looking at any kind of regulation with this or anything, but it is a concern. It's very much a concern. I mean, we talk about flying airplanes with vacuum systems, and sometimes the applicants have never flown an airplane with a vacuum system, but tomorrow they're legal to go out and do it. And there are very few things in life that you can be licensed for or certified for that you can achieve that certification without ever having done it, and this is one of them. You're legal to go fly down to minimums at a very busy airport in an airplane with a system that you've never flown.
Yep. And that could become, and it could be in that same G1000 system, meaning what if the G1000 went out and you're down to those 3 dials that are the backup gauges?
Right.
And those are steam gauge gauges, right?
Yeah.
So I have a airspeed indicator and just a reference to a few things that are probably going to make me land safely, but not if I don't really know how to interpret those and use those, right?
Right.
How many people, this is a little bit of a soapbox for me, but how many people do you fly with in a G1000 type check ride environment that you feel may not have the capability to fly without that system?
Yeah, it happens, and usually what happens with the map display when I do something to the map display to make it go away, usually I'll just change the scale so that you see a big blob of the United States over there, so it doesn't really do you much good.
I don't have my 3 points of reference anymore.
Right. And you need to know where you are just by using a VOR and using some kind of distance measuring capability. GPS and it would normally be what it is, maybe DME if you happen to have it in the airplane, but it's a lot more than a video game. We need to be able to fly and know where we are using other than the map display. And I, as I think most examiners do, we do have you turn off the ability to show your position on your EFB, whatever platform you're using for your electronic flight bag.
Which again can get very difficult if you get really addicted to that and you don't ever turn it off yourself. That's a skill that will erode. Even if you learn how to do it for that check ride day, it is a skill that will erode if you're not practicing flying without it, for sure. So that brings up steam gauges, and the majority of aircraft that are available for training and rental are going to be steam gauges. So you're going to have to understand the scan for that. You're going to have to understand how not to become, even with a G1000, how not to become, so dependent on one indicator that you get fixated on that. And during your training, Vicki and others, you're going to learn about fixation and how to have a quality scan and know when you may be getting bad information. That's the tricky part of becoming an instrument pilot, is learning that maybe this information that I'm seeing is not accurate, and how do I overcome that? Because the majority of people that get really hurt, that's how they get really hurt. They stop trusting their instruments. And so while you're being signed off for any instrument airplane, you need to be able to fly any instrument airplane. So I would highly encourage that you at least mix it up. you might want to take your check ride in G1000 or not, but mix it up either way. And I would say the same thing to a steam gauge person. If you have access to a G1000, you would be doing yourself a disservice not to learn how to scan in the G1000 as well, because you may have the opportunity to fly that in the future, and you surely don't want to be uncomfortable or not proficient and then put yourself in IMC in a system that you're not proficient with. Whether it's towards the G1000 or away from the G1000, you should make sure you're proficient either way.
Yeah, and one thing that we're required to do is a partial panel approach, we call it, but approach with loss of primary flight display, I think, is the way it's actually worded in the ACS. One thing that in a steam gauge airplane, one thing that we really can't simulate in the airplane is a vacuum system failure. We can cover up the vacuum instruments, but it's very obvious when we got
instant failure.
Yeah, we got rubber covers. We got covers over the instruments. It's obvious that they have failed. But the thing that we just can't simulate a vacuum pump failure, because those instruments, first of all, they don't have a flag on them that tells you that they failed, and they don't just instantaneously give you wrong information. They slowly do it. So that is where a simulator comes into play. Simulating a vacuum pump failure in a simulator is a extremely valuable tool.
And I don't care how much you practice it, it's still going to disorientate you for some period of time, because if you can make it not be instantaneous, again, like the putting a rubber cover on the dial, you have a attitude indicator that starts to lean one direction that you're not really leaning, or you're not really turning, and a heading indicator that tells you might be leaning or turning the other direction.
Right.
Boy, how disorienting can that be when you think your wings are level, and then you start turning and seeing something different. You're going to be really out of whack really quick. So find some time to do that practicing in a simulator if you have access to that, because it's going to make you better, and it's going to prove that you better have your scan game on, because there is a backup to a backup for almost everything in instrument flying, but you do have to practice and you do have to know how to do it.
Yeah.
So some of what Vicki asked us for was really talk through the different layers of communication stations within instrument flying. Not sure if she flies at a controlled airport or non-controlled airport, but I would think someone who got their private certificate at a non-controlled airport, who really talks to the pattern a lot, and doesn't do a lot of other radio communications with different ATC agencies, then this could be all foreign, really, really foreign. So at this airport, we have a tower. We talk to that tower and get handed off quite a bit for flight following in a major city like Houston, but this might be new to a lot of you. So we'll kind of go in the order in which we would talk to these people for instrument training. So obviously, you're going to learn how to do this, but you would put together a flight plan. You would learn how to do that flight plan, and then you would file said flight plan with ForeFlight or maybe a weather briefer or something like that. But you're going to ultimately file that flight plan.
Right.
Once that flight plan is filed, you're going to ultimately get in the plane, get ready to leave, much like you would talk to a ground control if there was such a thing. You need to talk to clearance delivery, either on the radios or on the phone, to get your clearance to go. What is clearance delivery, Wally?
Well, clearance delivery is an air traffic controller for the most part, and they're basically going to give you you're going to file something that you want. You're going to tell them you want to file this routing, you want this altitude, and you want to leave at this time. And now you're ready to go. They are going to tell you, okay, yes, you are cleared via the routing that you filed, or the routing may be slightly different, the altitude may be slightly different, but they're gonna give you what your clearance is now. So now it may change. It may change en route. It may change quite a bit, but at larger airports, there will be a dedicated clearance delivery frequency. At a smaller airport that's controlled, it's probably ground control. So you call up so-and-so ground or so-and-so clearance. Cessna 123, we'd like to pick up our IFR clearance to XYZ airport. and they're going to say something to the effect of, "You're clear to the XYZ airport as filed."
That's a dream. That's a dream. If
Yeah,
you get
yeah,
that.
yeah. Climb and maintain 2,000. Expect 7,000 10 minutes after departure. Departure control frequency 12345. Squawk 1234. And then you'd read that back, and now you have your clearance. So now you have this plan that you think is and if it's a different plan, if something is different, you certainly need to make some calculations. You need to plug this in your EFB and make sure you're happy with it, because you may now have a longer route, and maybe fuel was critical on the original route. Now, if you've got an extra certain number of miles, it's going to take you longer, going to burn more fuel. You may not be able to do this, but in all likelihood, it will work.
I think that's an important point that I don't think I realized until I started flying my own routes IFR. You do all this training, and the training is simulated, like all training is, right? We fly north. We want to practice the Huntsville DME arc. So my instructor's talking to me. We're flying out there. They tell me what heading to fly. I've got the foggles on at this point, but it's really not a long cross country of sorts where I have to file these different points to get there. And when I started flying to Austin quite a bit in IFR conditions, I was shocked how far south they would send me to get to Shiner versus just going direct to Austin, right? So what is a 55-minute VFR flight at 8,000 or 7,500 feet to and from, it's a very different flight if I have to go 40 miles out of my way to get to Shiner. And there's a lot of times when they're landing, bigger planes are landing from the west, that I have to take that path. I have to take that route. Sometimes I get direct on clear days. I get direct, but in IMC conditions, they're probably going to make you fly something that is route based. So while I'm flying over there, I have to hit these fixes so that if I lost my comms, they would know what I'm expected to do. And these fixes become very important in real IMC conditions, but that could add a lot of flight time to your flying.
Yeah.
You might think you're flying with a crosswind all the way there, but diverting to the west might put me in a direct headwind for 45 minutes and change things drastically. So IFR flying, while sometimes easier, can also be sometimes much harder based on the route that you get assigned. So I'm talking to clearance delivery. A clearance delivery tells me I've got my clearance. If I'm at a non-towered airport, I might call to be released. And if I'm at a towered airport, I might tell them that I'm ready to go, and they might clear me for my release. Ultimately, I'm going to get in the air, and the next person I'm going to talk to at a non-towered airport is going to probably be approach and or departure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think those are two radio stations or two different
Yeah.
people, but approach and delivery really are the same thing.
Yeah, they're not going to get upset if you're actually departing and you call them approach, or if you're arriving and you call them departure. Houston approach, Houston departure, probably the same person.
Probably.
But if you call them the wrong thing, there's certainly not going to be any offense taken.
And so they're managing, I don't know what a distance would be. We did a really good ATC show if you want to listen to it, with an approach controller and some center controllers that gave their feedback and thoughts about how they think about the traffic in their segments. But an approach controller is probably managing 18,000 feet and lower, maybe 12,000 feet and lower traffic close to a metropolitan area. And they're guiding that traffic into an airport system probably.
Right.
Whereas the next person you're going to talk to is probably going to be a center.
Yeah.
And a center is a much larger segment of airspace.
Right.
And in most cases, probably handling higher traffic down to lower traffic. I'm sure there's an overlap there somewhere, but probably all the way down to 4,000, 5,000 feet a center's managing. But they probably have their own segment of airspace. So
and there are some places where the center may actually be controlling you all the way down to the ground, out in the more remote areas. So just physically where these people are located, obviously the tower guy, I mean, you can see the tower at a big airport, along a tall structure, the people that are controlling you to clear for takeoff, clear to land, moving you around on the ground, they're up in that cab in the top of the tower. Most likely the approach control people are in a room, probably downstairs, but they're physically in that same building. And then the centers are totally off
business building somewhere, maybe.
Yeah, it's a big federal building, and I wish I knew how many centers there are in the United States, but I'm going to say probably between 8 and 10 centers. We happen to have one here, Houston Center. So after you and it's very possible that going from maybe from here to Austin. I don't know, but it's possible that you may never even talk to a center. You may leave Houston departure control. I don't know.
It's all approach and departures.
Yeah. So you leave Houston departure, and then you're going to call Austin approach.
Now there's different segments in Houston, so right. I might talk on one channel for a while and then get handed off to Houston. That's where the approach and departure comes in. I used to think it was the people closer to the big airport was the approach and the people further away were departure, but that has nothing to do with it either.
Right.
But you'll go from Houston approach channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to Houston approach 6, 7, 8, 9.
Right.
And you'll talk to those for a long time. Somewhere around halfway, maybe a little bit further west than halfway, they'll hand you off to Austin approach, and you'll talk to them. I think it's just one channel you talk to on the way in, and then get handed off to that next tower, if there is such a thing.
Yeah.
Or they'll tell you, flight following services are, terminated, and you squawk 1200 and contact the common traffic frequency, right? Or radio frequency change approved.
Right.
But you're ultimately just talking to the people in the pattern at that point.
Well, going into a non-controlled airport, you will stay on that squawk until you land, and then you need to call them up on the telephone. Now, if you're able to, if it's VMC conditions and you're able to cancel IFR, really that's what I try to do if I can, just to alleviate me from having to make that phone call on the ground. Because if you go on the ground and you forget that phone call, you go over to get fuel, and you're putting your airplane away, and oh gee, did I call?
Messing up a lot of people. And I got sideways in my thought there. I was thinking of my flight following days to Austin and how I would handle those flights. But yes, under IFR, you would keep that squawk code and either call or cancel short of the airport if you had VMC conditions. And
if you call the controller the wrong name, they're not going to get upset with you. A lot of times I'm flying along and the person will say, am I talking to center or approach? Well, if you're talking to approach, you call them center, they're going to answer you. It's just not that big of a deal. I know flying with the airlines, I usually don't even say the name of the controlling agency. If I'm going from out of Houston going north, you're talking to Houston Center, then all of a sudden you're talking to Fort Worth Center, and then maybe Kansas City. When I check in, I'll just say Center.
Right.
Because you forget who you're talking to.
Yeah, I've had those moments both alone and with other people, and I'm like, oh my gosh, who am I talking to? In early days, is it departure or approach? I don't know, but
yeah.
I think those things aren't the things you need to be worrying about. And I think approach controllers and departure controllers realize that that's the last thing you need to be thinking about, and they really don't care either. They're not worried about what your nomenclature is.
Right.
Back into the IFR world, I think from a training perspective, and hopefully we covered your topics there, Vicki, but the big thing that I think people struggle with a little bit are holds. There's 3 different types of entries. People struggle with those entries. There's rules around holds. There's what they call standard turns, and you might be told to turn the opposite direction. So holds are a big part of IFR training. You do a hold with every applicant. Wally, you've done a lot of oval loops in your days, 1-minute tracks in these single-engine aircraft. Do you think students are pretty good at their holds? Applicants are pretty good at their holds?
Yeah. That's a loaded question. We could all probably do a lot better. just remember the entry is it's a recommended entry, and just by if you see one of those charts where it talks about, shows you how, the
60 degrees, 30 degrees.
Yeah, how to figure out what kind of entry to make. Just know that half of the entries are direct entries, and the other half is split between a parallel and a teardrop. Bottom line is, when you hit the holding fix, I mean, if you're trying to figure out what kind of hold you want to make, or entry, just look at all three types of entries. Okay, if I did a direct, I would have to do this. If I did a teardrop, I would have to do this. If I did a parallel, I would have to do this. When you hit the holding fix, you want to make the smallest turn possible. And if you kind of use that rule of thumb, okay, this is what a teardrop would look like. To do a teardrop, I'd have to turn 10 degrees. A direct, I'd have to turn 170 degrees. Parallel, I'd have to turn 40 degrees. Well, that tells you it's a teardrop entry. So you want to make the smallest turn when you hit that initial holding fix.
I guess I've always wondered, how often do major airline aircraft get asked to hold?
Not a whole lot. I would say in a year, I might hold 3 times, maybe.
Interesting.
And that might be on the high side.
Have you ever been asked to hold in a single engine aircraft on a real IFR flight that you can recall?
No,
I haven't either.
I
And that's one of those things that that deteriorates, right? On our check ride, you told me to hold 6 miles west of DayZeta on the 110 radial or 270 radial, and I nailed it. I know I knew how to do that.
Yeah.
You put me in a plane today and tell me to go out there and do that.
Yeah.
I might have to do some math and write some stuff down and program some stuff to make sure I'm right at that point. But at that day, you could have told me just about anything, and I know I had the skills at that time.
Yeah.
So if that, you might not get asked in your 6-year career flying, but when they do, you better be ready to do it, because you are certified to fly in IFR conditions, right?
And there are 2 kinds of holds. There's a published hold, and then there's a non-published hold. When ATC says hold as published, that's a score, because boy, you got it.
You got it written down.
You got the picture drawn for you, and hopefully you kind of have an idea of where you are on the approach plate or on the en route chart, wherever the hold is published. But hold as published is a good deal.
Yes, sir. Especially if you have it programmed into your autopilot.
Right.
That's even better.
Right.
Because it'll start the stopwatch for you. That seems to be the one thing I always forget to do, no matter what kind of hold it is. And then I think, to continue on what is the IFR training about? Obviously, there's a bazillion little rules on when you file an alternate, what you're supposed to do with lost comm procedures, etc. You'll learn all those things. And I think we really spend a lot of time in training on how to read an approach plate, how to interpret that approach plate, how to fly that approach plate the way ATC and the approach plate's expecting you to fly that approach plate. And then, more importantly, probably what to do if you have to go missed, right?
Yeah.
What are those missed instructions? What are those missed instructions if they're altered? What happens if I lose comms and they've been altered or not been altered? It's a lot of rules-based training, and probably branching off of those things that are rules based on whether you have comms or don't have comms.
Right.
And all that stuff can become very, very important if you're really an IMC and you happen to lose comms. Thank goodness for me, I've not had that situation happen, and I hope it never does happen.
I will say this: even the older airplanes that were out here flying around, I mean, 40-year-old airplanes aren't too much out of the question. But even the older airplanes, the radios in them are usually pretty doggone good.
Yeah.
And the chances of a lost comm scenario are pretty remote. I believe that if you have lost comm, you're probably going to have lost nav.
Really soon.
I think that if you have lost comm, the reason you have lost comm is for a total electrical failure.
Yeah.
So we can't navigate either. So if the weather is below let's say it's 1,000 overcast everywhere. How are we going to get in? And that's something to think about. And there's no clear answer. I mean, every scenario is different. But, we can sit there, well, if we have lost comm, we fly our last filed routing, and then we fly this approach. Well, if we don't have the ability to navigate, how are we going to do that? And it's something to think about.
Yeah, it's not just the compass that's going to save you there. You're going to have another mechanism. And I think if you have an EFB, you're probably going to need to depend on that at some level for sure. I know I would depend on that, and I would have been declaring an emergency and no one would have heard me as I did that. But as we always say, if you haven't practiced that and you think you're going to ever need it, you might want to go out and practice it, because it's going to be much harder to do if you've never, ever done it before, for sure.
Yeah.
So we could go on for 35 plus hours on all the things you need to learn from a ground perspective as it relates to IFR training. Hopefully we covered all the items that Vicki asked us to cover from the different types of air traffic control stations you may talk to. As always, whether you're an IMC or VMC, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.